Hey guys, tonight we're walking away from open fires, ovens, and busy stoves and stepping into the coldest, quietest corner of the house, the place where food doesn't sizzle, but simply waits. No flame, no steam, no frying sounds, just cool air, stone walls, wooden shelves, crockery, and the soft promise that tomorrow's meals are already halfway safe. We're talking about cold pantries and quiet food shelves, those calm, slightly chilly spaces that older houses used long before refrigerators hummed in the corner. Spaces designed not to impress guests, but to keep milk from souring, cheese from sweating too fast, bread from staling, roots from shriveling, and leftovers from turning risky overnight. If that sounds like your kind of cozy, slow survival, settle in. Let's open the door gently and step inside. The door to elsewhere, leaving the warm kitchen. In many old houses, the kitchen is the hottest room. A stove or hearth burning for hours, pots bubbling, baking bread filling the air, steam fogging windows, people moving in and out with firewood and dishes. Wonderful for comfort, terrible for food storage. So somewhere nearby, sometimes connected, sometimes down a short hallway, there is another door. This one leads to the cold pantry, larder, or cool room. Open it, and you feel an immediate difference. The air is cooler and still. Light is softer or dimmer. Surfaces are stone, tile, or plaster. There's a faint smell of wood, herbs, maybe cheese or onions. Gentle, not harsh. It feels like stepping sideways into a different season. The kitchen is now, hot, busy, loud. The cold pantry is later, calm, patient, prepared. How a room stays quietly cold. Before machines, cold wasn't made, it was protected. Pantries and food rooms stayed cooler because of thick walls, stone, brick, or packed earth that changed temperature slowly. Position, often on the north side of the house in the northern hemisphere, away from the fiercest sun. Few windows, or very small ones, sometimes high up, sometimes shaded by deep eaves. Cool floors, stone slabs, tile, or earth that receive less direct heat. Airflow, small vents or tiny windows that can be opened at night and closed during the day to trap coolness. Nothing fancy, just physics quietly arranged, shade, mass, and a little controlled air. You can imagine someone long ago noticing, this corner of the house never gets as hot. Let's put the food here. Over generations, that observation becomes architecture. Shelves, lines of everyday security. Inside, the dominant feature is usually shelves, nothing ornate, just sturdy wooden boards, fixed brackets or simple cleats on the wall, maybe one or two freestanding units, some hooks for hanging items beneath. Each shelf has its own personality. Upper, slightly warmer shelves for dried goods and bread. Mid-level for jars, crockery, covered bowls. Lower, colder shelves close to the floor for milk, butter, cheese, delicate leftovers. The order might not be written down, but everyone in the house knows where things live. The bread corner, the jar of pickles, the crock with yesterday's stew, the basket of apples, the cloth-covered bowl with something cooling. This quiet order removes a whole category of anxiety. You don't have to ask, where did we put that? Your hand goes there automatically. Cool stone and clay, slow, gentle temperatures. Alongside wood, you often see stone and clay doing their quiet work. Thick stone shelves or slabs act like small indoor rocks of cold, soaking up cooler night air and resisting day heat. Clay pots and crocks, especially if slightly damp on the outside, can keep their contents a bit cooler by slow evaporation. Earthenware jugs of water stand in shaded corners, their surfaces beaded with moisture, keeping the drink inside more refreshing. Some families used butter crocks set in shallow troughs of cool water, ceramic dishes nested inside each other with a bit of water in between, sand or damp cloths to insulate and gently chill. No thermometer hangs on the wall, but hands know. This stone feels cool even in the afternoon. This jug sweats when the air is dry. This shelf is where milk lasts longer. The room becomes a quiet negotiation with temperature. Light, just enough to see, not enough to warm. Cold pantries prefer shadow. Too much light means heat, faded labels or cloth markings, faster spoilage. So the room's lighting is often a small, high window, a tiny pane set in a thick wall, maybe a single shutter you can crack a little, or on darker days, a lamp or candle brought in briefly, then carried out. You don't sit here and read. You come in, choose, and go. But that dimness has a charm. Jars gleam softly. Cloth covers look like pale hills. The wood of the shelves darkens with patina. Shadows make the space feel deeper and cooler. It is the opposite of a bright, hot storefront. It is a shaded, loyal cave for perishable things. The sound of a quiet room full of food. If you stand still in a cold pantry, what do you hear? Mostly nothing. Distant, muffled talk from the kitchen, maybe the soft ticking of the house, a slight creak as wood settles, the almost inaudible rustle of cloth when a draft moves it. No sizzling, no boiling, no chopping. Just stored potential. Shelves strengthened by routine. Jars lined up like silent promises. Bread loaf under a cloth, its crust softening in the cool air. Cheese resting, butter firming, onions waiting without sprouting too fast. It's a room full of future meals, but right now, everything is in pause. That pause itself is soothing. Lists in the head, not on the wall. Someone in the household always knows how many jars of jam are left, which crock holds pickles and which holds last week's soup, how much butter is still on the stone, whether the milk is still good or must be used today, which roots in the basket need attention first. There is a quiet mental map. Top right, herbs and teas. Middle left, yesterday's leftovers. Bottom front, things for breakfast tomorrow. Cold pantries and quiet shelves train a kind of soft awareness, not frantic inventory, just a steady background remembering. That awareness is its own kind of security blanket. You go to bed knowing we have enough for tomorrow and probably the next day. The door that doesn't slam. The door to a cold pantry is often heavy enough to seal reasonably well, light enough to open without effort, fitted to close firmly but not loudly. Slamming it would send jars ringing, bread loaves nudging, liquid sloshing. It feels wrong, even to a child. So the door learns to close quietly. A hand on the edge, a gentle push, perhaps a soft click as the latch meets frame. That closing sound becomes part of the house's evening soundtrack. Well cover, pantry door, shutters, latch. Each one says, things are in their places now. A sleep lesson, the cold pantry in your mind. There's a gentle metaphor hiding in this chilly little room. Your day is like the hot kitchen, busy, noisy, full of action. But inside your mind, you also need a cold pantry, a quiet place where worries are set down in containers, where tasks for tomorrow rest on shelves, where you are not cooking every thought at full heat. Before sleep, you can imagine taking today's leftover anxieties, putting them in a clean mental bowl, covering them with a cloth, placing them gently on a cool shelf labeled tomorrow. You don't throw them away, you just stop stirring them. Your cold pantry becomes a room in your head where plans and problems can wait without spoiling your rest. You close the door softly and walk away. A sleepy ending scene. Now imagine one of these pantries in the evening. The kitchen behind you is growing dim. pots are washed, the last warmth of the stove is fading. The air has that end-of-day feeling, tired but satisfied. You open the pantry door, cool air slips out and touches your cheeks. Inside, shelves hold a loaf of bread under a folded cloth, a crock of butter on a stone slab, a bowl of stew with a cover saved for tomorrow's midday, a row of jars with quiet things, pickles, preserves, maybe a little leftover dessert. You adjust one jar so it won't be knocked, tuck the cloth more snugly over the bread, and check that the bowl is properly covered. You don't rearrange much, just enough to be sure nothing will fall, nothing will spoil faster than it must. Then you step back, take one more small breath of the cool air, and close the door with a gentle push. Click. The shelves and their contents vanish into dimness, secure and
The cold pantry only looks calm because the work has already been done. Every jar on the shelf, every basket in the corner, every cloth-covered bowl, none of them appeared there by magic. They each took a little journey, from field or market or garden, through hands and knives and pots, until finally they ended up here, resting in the cool. Tonight we're going to trace that slow path, not in a rush, just in that sleepy, step-by-step way that turns food back into simple objects, baskets, jars, lids, cloth, shelves. Because the more you feel how much quiet effort went into filling this room, the easier it is to relax inside it. Coming home heavy, food at the threshold. The story begins outside the pantry. Someone comes home carrying weight, a basket of root vegetables still dusted with earth, a sack of grain that presses into their shoulder, a bundle of herbs tied with twine, a jug of milk a bit sloshed from walking, maybe a paper-wrapped parcel from the market stall. They step over the threshold with that subtle, familiar grunt of relief, that small exhale that says, "I've brought something back." For a moment, everything pauses on the kitchen table or floor. Baskets still full, jugs sweating in the warmer indoor air, parcels waiting to be unwrapped. The cold pantry door is still closed. Its shelves are waiting like open arms. Sorting at the table, what goes where and when. Before anything reaches the cool shelves, it passes through sorting. Hands decide what must be used soon, what can keep a little while on the counter, what deserves a place in the cold, dark quiet, what belongs in sacks, bins, or hanging bundles. On the table you might see a pile of carrots and turnips, potatoes in a heap, onions with long necks, a bunch of leafy greens, a bundle of herbs, eggs, bread, maybe a leftover from yesterday's meal. The mind starts rearranging them into futures. These greens for tonight, these potatoes for soup in 2 days, these apples to be eaten fresh, these to be cooked down later. The pantry doesn't just hold food, it holds decisions that have already been made. Wiping, trimming, and the quiet pre-clean. Nothing goes into the cold pantry exactly as it came in. There's a small, almost subconscious layer of cleaning and trimming, loose dirt brushed from root vegetables, outer leaves removed from cabbages or lettuce, long stems clipped, market strings or paper removed, drips wiped from jug mouths. You might hear the soft scrape of a knife trimming tops, a cloth rubbing the side of a crock, the dry whisper of onion skins flaking off, the thump of a potato set down with a little more care than before. This is not deep washing yet, just enough so that the pantry doesn't have to fight against obvious mess. It's a small courtesy. The cold room says, if I'm going to keep this for you, please tidy it a bit first. Baskets of roots, heavy quiet in the corner. Roots love the pantry floor. potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips. They'd often settle into baskets or shallow crates placed low where the air is coolest and light is least. Someone lays down a cloth or straw to pad the bottom, nests the vegetables with a little space between them, removes any damaged or soft ones so they won't spoil the rest. The baskets themselves are part of the calm, woven sides softened by years of use, handles polished by fingers, bottoms scuffed from sliding over stone or wood. Once set in their corner, the roots stop being today's harvest and become winter's meals, even if winter is still far away. They sit heavy and quiet, like small stones of food. Bread, cheese, and the high middle shelf. Some kinds of food don't like it too cold. Bread, for example, stales faster in harsh chill, grows tough in too much dryness, prefers a cool, moderate perch. So loaves often rest on higher shelves, wrapped in a cloth, not touching direct stone, not too near drafts, not right against strong-smelling foods. Cheese, depending on type, might join them. Firm rounds under waxed or natural rinds, wedges in paper or cloth, small wheels resting in a row. The higher shelves are a compromise between comfort and preservation, cool enough to not shock, cool enough to not rush spoilage. When you open the pantry door, these things are usually at eye level, the familiar daily comforts. You see the loaf, you see the cheese, you know you're not going to bed hungry. Jars and jellies, sunlight captured in glass. Along the walls you might find a beacon of color. Jars, jams and jellies, pickles and relishes, preserved fruits, maybe broths or sauces set for early use. They sit like small lanterns, red, amber, green, gold. Labels or chalk marks might tell the contents and date. Neat rows with slight gaps for fingers. These jars have already done their big work in the kitchen, boiling, sealing, careful filling. Now, like retired workers, they rest in the cool. Hands place them, stronger flavors a little off to one side, sweeter preserves somewhere easy to reach, newer jars behind older ones so the first in, first out rhythm stays intact. Every time someone adds a new jar, there's a tiny puzzle. Where does this fit so that we'll remember to use it? Over months, the wall of glass becomes a visual calendar of past seasons, spring berries, summer tomatoes, autumn fruits. The pantry quietly holds time. Leftovers and covered bowls, yesterday on pause. Cold pantries aren't only for big storage, they're also a holding pattern for yesterday. A stew you didn't finish, a roast you'll slice thin tomorrow, cooked grains you'll fry into cakes later. These live in earthenware bowls with snug lids, enamel dishes, simple plates inverted over smaller bowls, sometimes even stacked pots if the shelves are strong. Before they come in, they cool on the kitchen table or near an open window, steam drifted away, heat softened. Then, covers go on, someone carries them to the pantry, they find a spot, often mid-level, where they won't be forgotten. At night, that shelf becomes a gentle archive of the day's work. The room smells faintly of spices, broth, maybe roasted vegetables. You don't have to wake up and cook from nothing. You can start tomorrow with something already waiting. That knowledge is deeply restful.
The cold pantry looks still, but it's not a museum. Nothing on those shelves is meant to last forever. Bread dries, milk sours, roots soften, jars slowly empty. Even the quietest food is moving along its own invisible timeline. So every day, often without fanfare, someone in the house plays a slow, gentle game of use this first. A turn here, a sniff there, a bowl moved forward, a jar nudged back. Tiny edits that keep the pantry from becoming a graveyard of forgotten things.
Tonight, we'll shuffle along those shelves with them, checking, turning, and feeling how a bit of soft discipline keeps the room calm and safe. Morning visit, the first look into the cool. Before the kitchen fully wakes, before fires or stoves get going, there's often a quick trip to the cold pantry. The door opens, cool air touches warm morning skin, eyes adjust to dimness. The first look isn't dramatic, it's a quiet scan. Is the bread still soft enough? Does the milk smell fine? Did yesterday's leftovers set well under their covers? Are any fruits bruised worse than before? You might see a hand. Test the bread with a light squeeze, lift a cloth to peek at a bowl, tilt a jug and sniff at the mouth, thumb a potato or apple, feeling for new softness. This is housekeeping at its gentlest, not cleaning, not cooking, just seeing. The morning visit answers one simple question: what must we respect today? The front row, things that cannot wait. As the day's meals are planned, certain items get promoted. Something becomes, we should use this now. This can't sit another day. This goes in the soup tonight. This piece of cheese wants to be grated soon. These foods are quietly moved to the front row. Bowl pulled forward, jar placed just inside the door, bread turned so the older loaf is more reachable than the fresh one, a slightly soft apple set where a child's hand will grab it for a snack. No one writes urgent on them. The positioning itself is the label. The pantry's message to the cook is simple. If you don't know where to start, start here. The back row, reserves and rainy day food. Farther back on the shelves, partly in shadow, live the reserves. Jars of jam or pickles laid by for later, extra sacks of grain or flour, a second loaf, newly bought or baked, whole heads of cabbage, solid and patient. These things can wait. They're not ignored, they're just not yet needed. When a new batch of something arrives, old jars shift to the front, newer ones go behind. Older onions hang closest to hand, freshly harvested ones go further down the braid. The pantry quietly obeys a rule older than any sticker: first in, first out. That rule makes sure the back row doesn't become the forgotten row. Touch, smell, listen, the 3 pantry senses. The cold pantry doesn't come with expiry dates. Instead, people use 3 simple, powerful senses. Touch. Bread. Is the crust firm but not rock hard? Fruit. Firm with a little give or starting to collapse? Roots. Solid or wrinkled and rubbery? Cheese. Pleasantly firm or sweating and sticky? Smell. Milk. Neutral and creamy or sour and sharp? Leftovers, still smelling like food or something that wants to be thrown out? Jars, vinegar sharp for pickles, sweet for preserves, no odd musty notes. Listen, the quiet of the room, any buzzing, a sign of flies or intruding insects. The sound of lids lifted, a soft suction, not a dry scrape of something long forgotten. Each check is tiny, almost unconscious. Together, they make the pantry safer than any label could be. Turning and rotating, tidy little orbits. Part of shelf care is rotation, a kind of slow choreography of objects. You might see jars nudged forward as their neighbors empty, a nearly finished jar placed right by the door so someone will finally use the last spoonful, a fresh loaf set behind yesterday's half-loaf, a bowl of older apples pulled forward with new ones added behind. Hands move things in small arcs, left to right, back to front, high to low. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep the use this first items where eyes and hands naturally go. This movement prevents something sad, delicious food turning into guilt because it sat unseen until too late. Scraping, wiping, and the little resets. Even the best-managed pantry collects small messes, crumbs, onion skins, a drip of milk dried on stone, a ring where a damp jar sat. So along with checking food, someone regularly does tiny resets, wipes a shelf with a damp cloth, shakes out a basket and returns the roots, brushes away a little dust or flour, folds a cloth so it lies smoother over bread or bowls. These aren't big cleaning days. They're quiet 5-minute tune-ups. They keep the room from drifting into sticky, buggy neglect. They also make each visit more pleasant. You open the door and feel order, not chaos. Letting go, when food has truly had its time. Even with care, some things will pass their best moment. A lemon goes deep soft and spotted. A heel of bread is more crust than crumb. Milk finishes its turn and joins the sour milk recipes or the drain. A leftover has waited too long and its smell says no more. On those days, someone has to do the gentle work of letting go, trimming away bad parts if anything is still salvageable, carrying truly spoiled bits to compost, animals, or the trash, washing the container and returning it clean and neutral to the shelf. There's a small sadness in it, but also relief. Keeping obviously spoiled food just in case would only make the pantry anxious. Clearing it says the space is safe again. The room tells the truth. Planning from the shelves, not just from the market. One of the quiet powers of a cold pantry is this: you don't plan meals only from what you want, you plan them from what needs to be used. A cook might stand in the doorway in the late morning, looking in. Half a cabbage, 3 potatoes with little sprouts starting, a bowl of stew from last night, 2 apples with bruised spots. Today's menu begins right there. Stew warmed and stretched with extra vegetables, potatoes trimmed and turned into mash or fried slices, cabbage thrown into soup or cooked with onions, apples peeled, bruises removed, transformed into a quick compost. The pantry becomes the starting point, not an afterthought. This habit prevents waste and eases pressure. You don't have to invent meals from nothing. The shelves suggest them. A sleep lesson. Rotating your thoughts gently. The discipline of use this first isn't only for food. Your mind stores experiences, worries, ideas in its own pantry. Some thoughts are fresh and urgent. Others are lingering leftovers. Some are long-term plans sitting in the back row. If you never rotate them, one thing happens. Old worries stay on the front shelf forever. New tasks push in anywhere. Guilt grows like mold. Instead, you can briefly scan your mental shelves at the end of the day, decide which concern truly needs attention soon, consciously move some worries to the back shelf, not for tonight, and toss out 1 or 2 stale thoughts that no longer help. It doesn't mean ignoring problems, it means being honest. This must be handled tomorrow. This can sit a week. This is spoiled. I will stop feeding it my energy. Like pantry care, this is soft discipline, not harsh judgment. A sleepy ending scene. Imagine the cold pantry at late afternoon. Light is slanting through the high window. The air feels gently cool compared to the rest of the house. Someone stands in the doorway with a quiet, thoughtful face. They reach for a bowl of soup from yesterday and pull it to the very front, a nearly empty jar of jam, and angle it towards the door so it won't be forgotten, a slightly soft apple and set it where a child will see it first. They nudge a new loaf behind the older one. They pick up an onion that's gone too far and set it aside to deal with. They wipe one small sticky circle from the shelf with a damp cloth. Nothing takes long. No big speeches, just a few small, kind movements. Then they step back, feeling that subtle sense of satisfaction. The room speaks clearly again. If someone opens this door tomorrow half awake, they'll know what to use. You can borrow that feeling now. Imagine your own thoughts as jars and baskets on shelves. Move a few gently. Bring one useful plan forward for tomorrow morning. Slide a stubborn worry to the back of the shelf. Toss out one stale regret into the mental compost. Then close the door of that room in your mind. You don't have to reorganize everything tonight. You just have to do enough small turns that your inner pantry feels calm. Let the shelves line up in the dark. Let the jars stay quietly where you place them, and let
The cold pantry is not a machine. It doesn't hum at one steady temperature all year. It breathes with the seasons. In winter, it can feel almost like a little indoor cave of frost, a place where you can store not just food, but cold itself. In summer, it becomes a small refuge struggling against heat, relying on clever tricks and old habits to stay just cool enough. Tonight, we'll walk through that yearly cycle in slow motion, how people borrowed winter to help their pantries, how they defended their shelves during fierce heat, and how the rhythm of the year quietly shaped what sat in the cool, dim room. Winter, when the whole house helps. In cold climates, winter turns the world into one huge refrigerator. For a few months, the cold pantry is no longer the only cool place, but it becomes the best organized one. Doors and shutters might stay closed more, but cold creeps in anyway. Floors chill through stone and earth. Walls radiate a dull, steady cool. Air in the pantry feels dry and sharp. Food that would sweat and struggle in summer can relax. Root vegetables stay firm longer. Cheeses keep their shape. Butter stays pleasantly solid. Leftover meals rest safely for an extra day or two. Some families use winter as a reset, cleaning and airing the pantry when the cold keeps flies and insects away, moving certain items temporarily to colder outbuildings, letting the cold sink into stone and shelves so they start spring with a charged coolness. The cold pantry in winter feels like a contracting breath, everything tighter, stiller, more preserved. Borrowing the outside cold, windows, vents, and snow. When outside air is colder than inside air, the pantry can borrow that chill. On deep winter nights, someone might open a small vent or high window for an hour, let sharp air circulate around shelves, then close it again before the room gets too icy. Stone and thick walls act like a battery. They absorb the chill and release it slowly later when fires and bodies warm the rest of the house. In some regions, people even packed snow in boxes or between double walls, stored ice blocks from frozen ponds in nearby ice houses or pits, brought a bit of that ice closer to the pantry in summer via insulated chests. Not every house had a full ice house, of course, but even a simple habit, like letting winter wind flush the pantry at night, gives the room a deeper, longer-lasting cool. It's a quiet pact with the weather. You freeze us now, we'll remember it when the world warms up again. Threshold storage, between indoors and out. Winter also blurs the line between pantry and elsewhere. Some foods do best just outside the main warmth. Barrels of salted meat or fish in an outbuilding, baskets of apples in a shed or cool hallway, cabbages and heavy roots in a cellar corner, snow-cooled milk in a protected shady spot. The cold pantry becomes the inner ring of storage. Items you need often, or that don't like absolute freezing or drafts, live there. Things that are happiest in deeper cold sit one layer out. You might imagine a family in midwinter stepping into a freezing outer storeroom for a whole ham or big sack of grain, then transferring smaller portions into the cold pantry closer to the kitchen, and from there into the warm kitchen itself.
like concentric circles: deep cold, cold pantry, cooking hearth. The pantry is the gentle middle step that keeps food from swinging between extremes. Condensation and frost, the little puzzles of winter. Cold is not always simple. When a pantry gets very cold and then meets warmer air, moisture becomes a puzzle. Pots brought in steaming from the kitchen can sweat and drip. Lids may collect condensation. Cold walls can grow little beads of water when the door opens too often. Over time, people learn not to put very hot dishes straight into the coldest part of the room, to let leftovers cool in the kitchen first, to wipe down damp spots so they don't feed mold. On especially bitter nights, some pantries can even flirt with freezing: a thin crust of ice at the edges of a milk jug, butter going rock hard, leafy vegetables wilting from cold instead of heat. So winter pantry care is about gentle moderation. Embrace the cold, but don't let it bite too deep. Summer, the pantry under siege. Then the year turns. Days lengthen, light pushes into every gap, heat wraps around the walls. Suddenly, what felt like a cave becomes a fortress under siege. The pantry in summer has to work much harder. The outside air is warmer than the inside. Bringing in new food also brings in ambient heat. Stoves and hearths may run longer with seasonal cooking. You can almost feel the pantry tightening its jaw, doors closed quickly, vents opened only at the coolest times, freshly cooked dishes allowed to cool thoroughly before entering. Summer visits to the pantry are shorter: in and out, lid on, door closed. Every unnecessary minute the door stays open is a warm hand pressed against the room's forehead. Choosing summer foods with the room in mind. Seasonal eating wasn't just about what grew outside. It was also about what the cold pantry could reasonably protect. In hot months, families leaned more on dried grains and legumes, breads, pickles, and preserved items from earlier seasons, quickly eaten fruits and vegetables, foods that either keep well in a little warmth or are eaten fast. Milk might be bought or drawn more often in smaller amounts. Large cuts of meat might be salted, smoked, or cooked promptly rather than lounging in the cool. The pantry guides these decisions quietly: milk turning quicker than usual, butter softening at the edges, leftovers becoming risky sooner. People respond not with panic, but with small adjustments. Cook smaller pots, reuse leftovers faster, lean on foods that won't punish a slightly warmer shelf. The cold pantry in summer becomes less a long-term vault and more a short-term staging area. Night air and dawn visits. Summer still has allies: night and dawn. In many households, pantry care shifts into the cooler hours. Open a small vent late at night to let in the mildest air, close it before afternoon heat rises. Move the most vulnerable foods to lower shelves or nearer the coolest walls after dark. Morning visits are sharper and more purposeful. Check what survived the night well. Decide what must be used by noon. Adjust the day's cooking based on which foods are asking to be eaten now. If you listen in that early hour, you might hear a lid lifted, a quiet sniff, a murmur, "We'll use this today," a soft scrape of a jar being moved forward. Summer pantry care is more hands-on, more frequent, a daily conversation with warmth. When outside is cooler than inside. In some climates, evenings flip the logic. Summer days are brutal, but nights can fall quickly into pleasant cool. Houses that store daytime heat may stay warmer indoors than the air outside once the sun sets. Observant families notice the stoop or shaded yard corner feels fresher than the pantry.
Stone steps or outdoor benches radiate stored night cool by early morning. They adapt, placing some foods in well-covered containers on a shaded windowsill after dark, resting jugs of water in safe, sheltered outdoor spots during the coolest hours, and bringing them back into the pantry before the sun climbs. The cold pantry in such places becomes one piece of a wider cooling strategy, not the only solution, a network of shady spots, night breezes, stone surfaces, and timings. Rainy days and brief reprieves. In hot seasons, a cool, rainy day is like a holiday for the pantry. The air softens, carries moisture, drops in temperature just enough that everything inside the room breathes easier. On such days, you might open the pantry door a bit longer while reorganizing, cook slightly larger batches knowing they'll last a little longer. Enjoy the feel of cool stone under your bare feet when you step inside. For the room, it's a brief reprieve from siege, a chance for shelves and jars to let go of some heat before the next bright wave arrives. A sleepy lesson.
A cold pantry doesn't just keep meals safe, it keeps care ready. When someone in the house is ill, recovering, or simply worn thin, the kitchen doesn't always start from raw ingredients. It turns first to the cool room, to jars, crocks, and bowls that can be transformed into gentler food. Light broths, soft porridges, mild stews, slices of bread softened in warm milk, small treats that coax appetite back. Tonight, we'll walk through the pantry as if we're looking after someone quietly sick in the next room. No panic, no hospitals, just the old calm logic of what can we make that is kind to a weak body. The sickroom question. What will they actually eat? Illness changes appetite. Foods that seemed exciting yesterday can suddenly feel too rich, too rough, too heavy, too smelly. So the person standing at the pantry door isn't thinking about feasts. They're thinking, what will be gentle? What will sit quietly in a fragile stomach? What will give strength without shouting? Their eyes pass over strong pickles and sharp cheeses. Not today. Big loaves, maybe later. Spicy jars and dense roots, good for family meals, but not for the patient. They start looking instead for softness, broths, grains, mild preserved fruits. The cold pantry becomes a medicine cupboard made of food. The broth jar, quiet strength on a shelf. One of the most valuable things in a cold pantry is a pot or jar of broth. Bones simmered with a few vegetables, strained and cooled, fat skimmed or partly left depending on the patient, stored in a covered jar or pot on a cool shelf. In a normal day, broth is just a base for soups and sauces, but when someone is sick, it turns into liquid strength. You might see someone lifting a jar, feeling the wobble of cooled gelatin inside, pouring a little into a small pan, warming it slowly until it just barely steams, tasting it with a spoon and adjusting with a pinch of salt. In the sick room, that small bowl of warm broth doesn't require chewing, goes down easily in sips, brings salt, warmth, and calm to a tired body, all because days before someone decided to pour extra soup base into a jar and slide it onto a shelf instead of pouring it away. The pantry remembers your past kindnesses and returns them when you are too tired to cook from scratch. Soft grains, porridge, mash, and something light. Next to jars, sacks and tins of grain are a quiet treasury for illness. Rice, oats, barley, semolina, ground wheat or corn. From the outside, they looked like nothing more than dry weight in a container, but the person at the pantry door sees possibilities. A thin rice porridge for an upset stomach, smooth oatmeal cooked long and soft, barley simmered in broth, bread softened in warm milk and honey if allowed.
They measure out a small handful instead of a large one, ready to cook slowly until every edge is softened. These dishes are not flashy, they are kind. They don't demand strong digestion. They don't crowd the senses with strong smells. They can be eaten a spoon or two at a time. Grains in the pantry are like reassurance in solid form. If we have these, we can always make something gentle. Quiet fruits, stewed, preserved, and easy to like. Illness often makes the mouth crave something a little sweet, a little acid, something cool and refreshing. So the pantry's fruit shelves become a gentle pharmacy. Jars of preserved apricots or cherries, dried apples or plums that can be stewed soft, a fresh apple or pear that can be peeled and sliced paper thin. You might see someone taking down a jar of fruit in light syrup, warming a small portion to room temperature, not too cold for a sore throat, fishing out soft pieces and laying them in a little bowl, or simmering dried fruit in water until they plump and collapse, maybe adding a hint of honey or sugar, turning leathery slices into spoonable softness. These fruit dishes tempt appetite without pressure, offer water and vitamins in a form that doesn't shout, feel like a small treat in the middle of exhaustion, all quietly waiting on a shelf until needed. Bread made gentle, toasts, soaks, and crumbs. Pantry bread, when someone is ill, stops being a base for thick slices and starts being a tool for texture management. Options appear: thin toast, dry and light, to nibble with tea or broth; soft bread soaked in warm milk or broth until it becomes spoonable; soft breadcrumbs sprinkled into soup to make it more substantial without turning it heavy. At the pantry door, someone might choose the older loaf, a bit firmer, good for toast, slice carefully, place the softest parts aside to be soaked and mashed. Bread that might otherwise feel past its best becomes perfect for this moment. The pantry turns nearly stale into ideal for soaking. Nothing about this feels wasteful. It feels like food keeping its promise all the way to the end. Little extras, honey, herbs, and a pinch of comfort. Tucked along the shelves, you'll often find small comfort givers: a jar of honey, dried mint or chamomile, mild spices like cinnamon, lemon preserved in salt or syrup in some traditions. When someone is sick, these become finishing touches: a spoonful of honey in warm water for a sore throat, if appropriate, a mint or chamomile infusion to sip slowly, a hint of lemon in broth or water for someone tired of plain tastes, a dusting of cinnamon on bland porridge. None of these cure illness, but they improve the experience, make the patient feel cared for, encourage them to drink a little more, give the sense that they are not just being fed plain fuel, but offered flavor again. The cold pantry doesn't just store calories, it stores little kindnesses in jars and packets. Timing and tiny portions, the slow pace of recovery food. Food from the pantry isn't pushed on the sick person all at once. Instead, a small cup of broth, a few spoonfuls of porridge, a thin slice of stewed fruit, a corner of toast. If they manage that, more can come later. If they don't, the portion was small enough not to feel like loss. In the kitchen, this means not reheating the whole jar, just a ladleful, keeping the rest safely cool, and repeating the ritual throughout the day in little waves of care. The pantry supports this schedule easily. Its job is to hold the reserve, so the person in the sick room never sees an overwhelming bowl, only enough for now.
The cold pantry is a room, but it's also a ledger. Not with ink and columns most of the time, but with jars and baskets, with mental notes and small marks, with the way certain containers sit heavier or lighter than last week. Some houses had written labels and chalkboards. Others relied entirely on human memory, someone who knew every jar by weight and every sack by the way it slumped. Either way, the pantry wasn't just about keeping food cold. It was about knowing how much was there and whether it would last.
Tonight, we'll stand in that doorway not as a hungry person, but as a quiet accountant. We'll watch how old households kept track, labels, positions, seasons, and the simple, soothing arithmetic of "we have enough." Names on jars, ink, chalk, and smeared fingers. Sometimes memory is enough, sometimes it isn't. A shelf full of jars can look like a row of twins, all glass, all sealed, all slightly cloudy and dim light. So people began giving them visible names. You might see paper labels tied around necks with string, scraps pasted on with homemade glue or flour paste, wax pencil or charcoal marks directly on the glass, chalk writing on a nearby wall or board listing what's on which shelf. The writing doesn't need to be fancy. Plum jam, autumn. Cucumber pickles, strong brine. Beans, boiled, salted. Broth, use first. Sometimes just the year. 23 berries versus 24 berries. Over time, the labels get smudged, corners lift, ink fades, but even a half-legible mark can save someone from opening 3 jars in a row just to find the right one. Labels are small acts of kindness toward your future self. When you're tired, here is the name you'll need. The hand that knows by weight. Not every container gets a written name. Some are simply known by feel. A person might lift a sack of flour and guess within a kilo how much remains, tilt a jar and feel how thickly the contents move, know by the way a crock strains their wrist that it's half full, not nearly empty. There's a quiet satisfaction in this. Your body becomes a measuring tool. Once in a while you'll hear a muttered estimate. We have enough grain for 3 weeks. This jar will last until the end of the month. There's just enough oil left for a few more days. No scales, no spreadsheets, just hands and repetition. That estimation isn't perfect, but it's close enough to calm the mind. We are not running out tomorrow. The chalk corner and the tiny ledger. Some pantries keep a tiny patch of wall or inside of door reserved for chalk. Here, someone might note how many jars of a certain preserve remain, tally how many sacks of potatoes are still good, mark the date when a big batch of food was stored, remind themselves, cheese started here, 7th, or pickles, 4 jars. The markings can be messy, columns started and abandoned, numbers half erased, doodles from a bored child. Even so, this chalk space helps the house brain. When you're not in the pantry, you can still picture the tally. When someone asks, how much do we have left, you have an answer beyond a shrug. When shopping or trading, you don't overbuy what you already have. At some point, the chalk gets wiped, numbers adjusted, new lines drawn. Nothing permanent, just living arithmetic. The season as a silent label. Outside, the world changes. Leaves fall, snow piles, buds swell, heat rises. Inside the pantry, those changes are reflected in what's missing and what appears. You could, if you're very observant, tell the season just by opening the pantry door. Spring, fewer roots, first fresh greens waiting in bowls, older jams being used up. Summer, more fresh produce passing through quickly, jars filling up for winter. Autumn, shelves swelling with preserves, new sacks of grain, full baskets of apples. Winter, deep reliance on what's stored, jars and sacks slowly thinning. Each season writes a label across the whole room. Storm season, use jars sparingly. Harvest time, fill every shelf. Lean months, stretch what you have. The pantry's contents are a mirror of the year's generosity or difficulty. That awareness turns anxiety into planning. We had less fruit this year. Use the jam slowly. The harvest was good. We can afford extra in winter. Enough for guests. Social math at the shelves. Food isn't only about the family that lives in the house. Sometimes you also consider guests. An extra mouth in a hard time. a relative arriving without much warning, a neighbor in trouble. Standing at the pantry door, someone might think, do we have enough to feed one more person tonight? Could we spare a jar if their garden failed? Can we offer bread and something simple if they come? They scan the remaining loaves, the number of eggs, the depth of grains in containers, the amount of preserved foods. If the answer is yes, the heart relaxes. We can be generous without hurting ourselves. If the answer is barely, then hospitality becomes more careful, but doesn't disappear. A pan of something might be stretched with more vegetables, more broth, thinner slices. The pantry isn't just a private arithmetic of survival, it's a social equation. How much can we share and still stay safe? Children learning the enough language. Children start with simple questions. Is there dessert? Can I have more bread? Is there still jam? Pantry visits become lessons in soft finiteness. We have one jar of that left. Let's save it for a special day. The bread is for tonight and tomorrow morning, so not too thick a slice now. We're using the older apples first. You can pick one from this basket. They see shelves that get emptier over the week and fuller again after baking, jars slowly disappearing, then reappearing after harvest, adults making decisions based not on pure desire, but on balance. Without ever using the word inventory, children learn that scarcity isn't panic, abundance isn't license to waste, enough is rarely the same as everything. The pantry teaches them patience and priorities without a single diagram. When the shelves look thin. Every household knows the slightly sinking feeling of opening the pantry and finding it thin. Only ends of loaves left, jars mostly empty or gone, roots sprouted or soft, the last onion, the last jar of last year's jam. This doesn't always mean true desperation. Sometimes it just means we're due to bake. We need to grind more grain. We should visit the market or the neighbor. The thinness becomes a signal, not a sentence. Someone might make a list mentally or on a scrap of paper, plan tomorrow's errands based on what's missing, decide to cook something simpler tonight so there's less pressure. If a particularly harsh season has caused real shortage, the thin shelves carry weight. Rations grow smaller. Luxury foods disappear first. Creativity replaces excess. Still, the act of seeing the truth, of facing the shelves and naming what's not there, is strangely stabilizing. You can only plan from the real picture, not the imagined one. When the shelves look comfortably full. There are also days of quiet joy. You open the pantry and feel a fullness that is not boastful, just reassuring. Baskets plump with roots, jars lined up with barely any gaps, loaves resting under cloth, herbs and dried goods plentiful. You might think, we can feed ourselves well for a while. We can invite someone to share dinner. We can take a jar to a neighbor who's having a hard week. No one sings about it. There is no fanfare, but a full, orderly pantry changes the way a whole house sleeps. You go to bed not wondering if there'll be breakfast. You go to bed thinking about what kind of breakfast you'll choose. That difference is a very quiet luxury. A sleep lesson, seeing your own enough clearly. Your life has pantries that aren't made of wood and jars, skills you've stored, relationships you can lean on, savings of energy, small tools and routines that keep you going. Sometimes you only see what you lack, things you haven't done, tasks unfinished, goals not met, money or time you wish you had. Tonight, the cold pantry's gentle accounting invites a different view. What do you have on your shelves? Which jars of support or skill are fuller than you admit? Which baskets of experience could carry you a bit longer than you fear? You might mentally label a few. I know how to solve small problems calmly. I have at least one person I can message if I feel lonely. I've survived every day up to now. I have that track record stored. I've learned some things this year that I didn't know before. Your inner pantry may not be overflowing, but it might be less empty than your worst thoughts claim. You don't need perfect abundance to sleep. You just need enough to trust that tomorrow isn't impossible. A sleepy ending scene. Now, imagine the cold pantry in the quiet of late evening. Someone stands in the doorway, holding a small lantern. They aren't hungry, they're checking.
A cold pantry is peaceful, but it's not unvisited. Where there is stored food, there is always quiet interest from other small lives, mice and rats, beetles and moths, ants, the occasional bold fly, even mold and invisible things that like the same cool moisture we do. So behind the calm surface of stone and wood, there's a gentle, ongoing defense, not a loud battle, but a carefully drawn line between food for us and food for everything else. Tonight, we'll walk that line softly. Lids, jars, hooks, swept floors, and a kind of respect for how stubborn life is, even where we'd prefer stillness. The first unwelcome sign. The cold pantry feels safe until one day something small breaks the illusion. A few grains scattered where they shouldn't be, a tiny hole in a cloth bag, faint gnaw marks on a loaf heel, a rustle from the back of a shelf, a moth that flutters when you open the door. These are not disasters, they're messages. The room is saying, your food smells good, others have noticed. Someone pauses in the doorway a moment longer than usual, eyes narrowing slightly, ears listening. The pantry hasn't changed shape, but the perception of it has. From that day, every visit includes a new layer of awareness, not just what do we have, but also who else has been here. Containers with little fortresses. In response, food begins to move from open to closed. Grain that lived in cloth sacks is poured into jars, crocks, or tins. Sugar and flour find homes in lidded containers. Dried fruit leaves open bowls and goes into tightly closed crocks. Nuts get jars or sturdy boxes instead of baskets. You might see a row of ceramic jars with simple lids, metal tins that close with a satisfying, soft clang, glass jars with rubber seals and metal clasps, wooden boxes with sliding tops. The pantry starts to look more like a collection of little fortresses, each lid a drawbridge pulled up at night. Inside, the air is still cool and faintly scented. Outside, the room stays calm, but the rules have changed. Everything that can be put behind a barrier is. Hooks, hangers, and shelves off the floor. Mice and crawling insects prefer low, sheltered paths, so the pantry quietly rearranges itself vertically. You might notice garlic and onions hanging from hooks or in braids, cheese sacks suspended from sturdy beams, small bags of herbs dangling from pegs, cured meats, where customs allow, hung high, away from easy nibbling. Baskets themselves might live on shelves instead of directly on the floor, sit on low stands or bricks to break easy climbing routes. Even a few inches can make a difference. The pantry isn't trying to make a fortress tower just to remove the most convenient bridges. It's a room learning to think like a mouse. If I were small and hungry, how would I get here? Then closing that path gently. Swept floors and the logic of no crumbs. Crumbs and spills are invitations. A single broken grain isn't a feast, but it's a signal. Food is stored nearby. So one of the most important defenses is also the simplest, sweeping. You might see someone sweep the floor lightly after moving baskets, gather up onion skins, crumbs, and bits of leaves, wipe spots of spilled flour or sugar, check corners where webs and dust like to gather. The sound of the broom is soft but purposeful. Shh, shh, shh. Each pass of the broom erases tiny clues that might lead small guests to keep exploring. To human eyes, the room already looks clean enough. To the tiny nose of a mouse, that extra sweep makes a big difference. Smell management, letting only the right sense speak. Strong smells travel far. Pungent cheese, fish, cured meats, spicy pickles, overripe fruit. They don't just inform the human nose, they tell insects and animals something very interesting is here. So pantries often practice smell management. Stronger scented foods sealed in jars, crocks, or tightly covered dishes. Particularly aromatic items kept in a different corner. Trash and trimmings taken out quickly so they don't linger. Sometimes herbs are hung not only for cooking, but to smell stronger than the most tempting foods. Bay, thyme, rosemary, lavender in some regions. These don't fool everyone, but they add a layer of complexity to the air. The pantry says you might smell something good, but you can't locate it easily. For the human, it becomes a gentle, blended scent of home. For the intruder, it's a confusing maze. Tiny traps and silent deterrents. In older times, more direct measures appeared too. Simple snap traps for mice, bowls of water under table legs to slow ants, small dishes of ash, sand, or sharp herbs under certain shelves. In some cases, cats allowed occasional supervised visits. These defenses were as quiet as the pantry itself. No poison signs, no chemical fumes, just physical obstacles and a few old tricks. A trap might be checked daily with calm, not with triumph. If it caught nothing, it served as a warning. Someone tried to come in. If it caught something, the problem was acknowledged and dealt with. Then the trap reset. None of this felt like a war. It was more a negotiation. This part of the world is ours to eat from, not yours. The watcher's eye, one person who really notices. In most houses, one person becomes the unofficial guardian of the pantry, the cook, an older relative, someone who simply cares about order. They notice first, droppings in a corner, a faint gnawed edge, a moth that doesn't belong. Their quiet vigilance saves the household time and food. They might say, casually, we should put the grain in jars this year, ask for a new lid, suggest moving a basket higher, bring in fresh herbs to hang and scent the room. The rest of the family may not realize how much worry that eye prevents. They just experience the result. Food rarely ruined, few unpleasant surprises, a pantry that feels safe. When an intruder wins around. Even with all this care, sometimes a mouse or moth gets farther than you'd like. A sack chewed through, a jar's edge not closed quite right, a cloth cover not tight as it should be. When that happens, there is a small decisive ritual. Remove what's truly spoiled or contaminated, clean the affected area thoroughly, check nearby containers and corners for related damage, strengthen the defenses, better bags, tighter lids, new hooks. No one can make food perfectly untouchable in a living house, but each incident becomes a lesson rather than a catastrophe. The pantry doesn't become a place of fear, it becomes a place of response. A sleep lesson, boundaries for your own stored energy. There's a gentle parallel here for your inner life. Your cold pantry of energy, your rest, your ideas, your attention, also attracts little intruders, nagging thoughts, pointless scrolling, old arguments replaying, random guilt, little compulsions that nibble at your time. You can't seal your mind in stone, but like the pantry, you can put your most precious resources in jars, specific times and spaces, protected from interruption. Sweep away easy crumbs, small habits that signal your attention is always available. Raise some things off the floor. Keep certain topics away from the most tired, vulnerable moments of your day. Notice early signs when a tiny worry keeps returning to the same shelf. You don't have to fight a war with your distractions. You just quietly say, "This corner is for me. This time is for sleep. Little intrusions, not now." And then you act accordingly, in small, consistent ways. A sleepy ending scene. Now picture the pantry at night, after the house is gone quiet. A lantern was here earlier. Hands checked lids, swept the floor, straightened jars. Baskets sit on their shelves, not on the cold stone. A cheese sack hangs peacefully from a beam. The door is closed. In the dimness, the room is almost completely still. If a mouse noses along the outside threshold, it smells very little to guide it. No crumbs, no spilled sugar, no easy entry. Maybe it tries once or twice and then moves on, guided by easier scents elsewhere. The pantry sleeps. Inside, on those shelves, bread waits, safe under its cloth. Jars hold the taste of summer. Roots rest heavy and undisturbed. Milk and butter grow no more dangerous than time allows. The room is not sealed from the world.